and welcome. I'm looking forward to this panel. I have some great panelists with me today, and I think we should have a robust discussion. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Jo Stewart-Rattray. I wear many hats. You'll see that it says that I'm the National Vice President, Community Boards for the Australian Computer Society, but I'm also one of the global founders of the She Leads Tech initiative for ISACA. I sat on the International Board of Directors for 7 years, and I currently sit on the Information Security Advisory Group as well. Before we go any further, I would like to, even though we are meeting virtually today, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And I wish to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us today. I'm joining you from the Ngadjuri country, the Ngadjuri lands of the Clare Valley in South Australia. So without any further ado, I'd now like to introduce and have them introduce themselves, my amazing panellists. First, someone I've known for a long time and have worked together a lot with, Chris Dimitriadis.
Thank you, Jo. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be with you in this panel discussion today. I'm Chris Dimitriadis. I'm the Chief Global Strategy Officer for ISACA. I have been volunteering for the association for the past couple of decades. I'm a past chair of the board member for around 10 years. And my career is more or less in cybersecurity, technology, and business. I also come from the gaming industry. I have been working in the gaming industry for the past 15 years as Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Technology Officer, and Group CEO of a multinational company. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Siobhan.
Thank you, Jo. My full-time role is with the Australian Computer Society. I'm the director of their innovation labs and their scale-up program across 3 facilities. And I'm also the acting director for the professional skills assessment migration program. Outside of that, when I'm not sleeping, I'm also an advisor to Which and Banking as a Service product. I'm a mentor for the Australian Film, Television and Radio School for the Innovation Capstone Project. I'm also an advisor to SP Jain, the Global School of Management. And I'm also an advisor to BrainSTEM, helping young girls get into STEM projects within high school. Thanks.
So I can see that for you, Siobhan, sleep is highly overrated. I understand
totally
that.
Overrated.
Now,
totally.
And now, Raven, tell us about you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Raven David. I've had about 15 years experience in the cybersecurity industry. At the moment, my full-time role is Manager Digital Risk and Compliance, looking after the cybersecurity management system of a large water utility, Sydney Water, servicing over 5 million customers, water, wastewater, and stormwater services, including recycled water. It's quite an extensive task looking at operational technology risk. Previously to that, I've worked in the retail industry, spreading across establishing an ISMS, which is an information security management system in compliance to the 27001 standard. My passion is in and around compliance towards these standards and navigating the regulatory field that is quite a nightmare. I'm also a member of the Security Influence and Trust Cybersecurity Awareness Committee, which is a passionate committee that's been founded for the last 5 years, looking at cybersecurity influence and awareness in and amongst the Australian community and really bolstering that education, awareness and influence aspect into the betterment of our organisation and making sure that human risk element is well addressed.
Thank you. Thanks, Raven. And last but not least, Philip.
Hi there. I'm Philip Whitmore. I'm a partner at KPMG New Zealand, based in Wellington. But for the last 25 years, I've been actively involved with the Auckland chapter of ISACA, sitting on the board for about 21 years now. So it's great to come along and join this panel today. Certainly exciting times ahead.
Thank you, Philip. And I have to say, I love Wellington. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. But my God, I've never been so cold as I was in Wellington. I had to go out and buy a possum and merino stole just to try and keep myself warm, not just because of either. So today we're going to be talking about the state of the threat landscape in Oceania. And what I'm really glad about is we have our local experts who are going to bring different perspectives into this discussion. But we also have with us Chris, who's going to bring that global flavour to it too, because you may not be aware of it, but it's actually in the middle of the night for him. He's in Athens in Greece. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to actually throw the very first question to you, Chris, which is, what trends are you seeing globally in the digital trust space? And you might want to just expand on the digital trust space, because it's not a term that not everybody would be aware of.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. So digital trust is about digital technologies that are operating the way they are intended from a risk point of view. I mean, it includes cybersecurity flavor, privacy, governance of technology, management of technology, everything that has to do with a particular implementation of a digital technology that operates according to how their owners intended. So for us, for ISACA, digital trust is about the convergence of professions. It's about bringing together the cybersecurity profession, the privacy one, risk management, governance of enterprise IT, and of course anything that has to do with assurance and audit, in order to be able to provide a more holistic approach. So as far as digital trust is concerned from a global perspective, what we're seeing nowadays is the even more rapid proliferation of technologies, both in the private industry and in the public sector as well, in order to create value out of data and out of information. And especially with the introduction of those faster networks, the 5G networks, we're expecting to see an even faster proliferation of these digital ecosystems, because from my point of view, that was the missing link. Meaning that we have been discussing and having, and we have seen implementations in AI, in blockchain, big data, IoT, of course, and anything that has to do with industrial systems and operating technology. But now with the introduction of that missing link, this very, very fast network, the 5G network, it is expected to see an acceleration in the development of digital ecosystems that combine one or more of those technologies that I have just mentioned. So this is being recognized by governments around the world as well. We're seeing a lot of initiatives in the European Union with new regulations, standards, and guidelines around for protecting those digital ecosystems. We see similar trends in the United States, and of course in several different Asian countries, in Africa, more or less all around the world. And I'm not mentioning Australia and New Zealand and Oceania as a whole, because you are aware of the regulatory updates in the region. So in order to conclude, I believe that those trends and the adoption of emerging technologies will certainly introduce even more risks, especially by taking into account that the supply chain is expanding, complexity is increasing, and we as digital trust professionals need to make sure that we have all controls in place in order to support our business and organizations.
Great, thanks, Chris. Now, Raven, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned digital trust in your introduction. So do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I can probably start off in the operational technology domain. Coming from a water utility, we are really subject to that emerging technology. And when we look at that as a problem, what we try to do is organically grow that domain rather than reaching out and trying to stay ahead of the market. I think there's quite a big rush to that type of technology. And as we know, when there is a rush to technology, security is often an afterthought. And this becomes quite a problematic area when the business is trying to be competitive and we're trying to get those technologies out. trying to stay ahead of the curve, but at the same time, the security just hasn't caught up. Something that I could probably say we can address that problem with, being a little bit solution focused here, is when you roll out these technologies, you put them in more of an advisory mode, more of a listening mode, and not necessarily a responsive mode. Almost the way you could understand how an IDS works, an intrusion detection system. You wouldn't want to put it in prevention mode before you put it in detection mode. It's a similar construct to the way you can handle those IoT devices. And I think for me, the concept of digital trust in emerging technology is, I do believe blockchain is going to provide some real value here. For me, when I think of blockchain, I think of zero trust. I think of an ability to trust a system without necessarily trusting the individual or the technology in terms of the unit itself. So if we're able to establish a system based on zero trust, which I do believe blockchain can provide that, based on its peer-to-peer sort of network, then maybe we actually have a way in which we can trust a person or trust a user or trust the system, only because we trust the mechanics of it all and not necessarily the individual component.
That's great. Thanks, Raven. Now, Siobhan, I know Raven's touched on something that you brought up when we were speaking too, which is around, is blockchain a viable protection against cyber attacks?
Yeah, I was actually listening with great interest then, Raven. So I'm going to counter that. Effectively, blockchain's either public or private structures. Ethereum would be a good example of a public blockchain platform. When they're public, they're literally open for anyone for all hours to look at, examine, analyze, and obviously from a cyber protection point of view, if it's not encrypted, which it can't be if it's public to that level, it can easily then be reviewed enough to then be hacked. So then you're looking at a private structure, which doesn't allow participants to easily kind of engage with it. And it therefore doesn't provide any more security than a database itself that is encrypted. So evidence at this point in time suggests that blockchain wouldn't be the golden bullet. It has to be an encrypted approach to your database. So happy to argue.
Interesting. So anybody else want to jump in on that, because we've got two opposing points of view there?
Lucky it's virtual.
Look, it's interesting. Blockchain, while it's new, to me feels very much how it's being used in security, like the old PKI days, which people struggled with, but it does take out the intermediate aspect. So yes, potentially it might work well for that authentication in terms of a person, but that's a small aspect of security. So beyond that, you do need all these other controls. So it might be an enabler for aspects of security, but for how long? While we're reasonably comfortable with some of the blockchain technologies out there now, it often comes down to the implementation of them, or over time, issues get identified, and that whole trust layer, we're embedding a particular blockchain in there. Then, if that fails, the whole aspect fails. Wait and see, I think.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think blockchain has been a bit of a double-edged bullet for us in this industry. We know that, for example, cryptocurrencies has enabled the ability for ransomware to be as proliferating the way it has been. But when you look at other applications of blockchain, like digital identity, so there is actually quite a sort of global issue happening at the moment, particularly in India at the moment, where identity is a real problem. It's quite complicated to actually establish who is who at the moment. And I think it's partially because of the population increase and things like that. They've actually used blockchain to identify people in a method where they share that peer-to-peer network. And although I fully take the point around it can be a public or private network, I think depending on the type of technology we use, we might actually be able to set it up in a way where it is decentralized, and that decentralization of it all allows that anonymity and trust. But it's definitely something probably worth having a chat in the pub over a couple of drinks or something.
Hopefully soon.
When we can all do that, that would be really cool. I mean, as we all know, that's always been the thing about Oceania Conference, is that's exactly what we would do afterwards, is we would go and have a drink and have a yak about this stuff. But unfortunately, it might have to be virtual. I'm going to go to Philip now. And Philip, just to ask you, one of the things that you were talking about to me was we've never spent more money on security than we currently are. And that's absolutely 100% true. Or had more people focused on the discussion and the action around that. But we continue to see the headlines, which are pretty fearful, and it feels like we're not making a lot of progress. So what's going wrong? What do you think is going wrong?
I think we're too focused on the flashing lights and shiny toys. We've all got limited funds, limited time, so therefore we need to take that and focus in areas that present the greatest risk to our organisations. And each organisation that's different. We'll have some very similar risks across most organisations and some very different ones. Instead, what people are doing is often taking a shotgun approach to security, taking that limited time, that limited money, and throwing it the aspect that makes the biggest noise, or it's the shiny lights. It's risk management. And traditionally, IT people, it's not something they've learned. It's not something that's interested them. It's not something that's been talked about identifying what those risks are and then focusing on that. Instead, we make some judgment calls based upon what someone else we know has put in place, what the vendors are trying to sell us, and vendors are great at leading us down the garden path. And that becomes an issue about that limited time and limited money. So, I've seen plenty of large organizations, despite that, despite the security team gone from 1 to 30 people, they aren't that much better. There's an arms race, and they're slowing, with the criminals, and they're falling behind.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Philip. And I have to say that as a CISO myself, I absolutely get where you're coming from. And I know, Siobhan, this is really in your sweet spot as well with some of the stuff that we've talked about. So let me throw it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I kind of coined it the same way. It's that classic arms race, kind of thinking of the Cold War. But from what I've seen or what I've been in conversations around is that, hackers will take their time. They will find the lowest waterline, a PA's or someone's email that they can infiltrate. They'll then just sit there and watch. Patience is a virtue in this sort of game. And then they'll see, an access code come through. They'll take that data. They'll start seeing what happens in the business. They'll see a payroll packet. They'll take that data. And then, 6-12 months down the track, that's when you have a breach. And email, I think, is one of the biggest areas of risk. We don't seem to have enough focus on that when we have a look at our broader systems. So it's an interesting piece, but many years ago, I used to work with ArmorGuard, the armored transport company, managing cash flow. Take your time, watch what people do. Same with hackers.
And I fully agree to that. And very quickly, I would like to comment that this is absolutely true. I mean, at some point, protection will fail with cybersecurity. This is definitely true. And I think that's why most organizations should start focusing more on the recovery part and in response, because this is where we see most of the failures in those high-profile incidents that are hitting the press, or in lower-profile incidents that we learn every day through our professions, right? We see constant failures in response, even if detection works, which is very, very hard as well. We see constant failures in response and in recovery as well. And I think that the owners of an owner of a business is really, really interested, not necessarily for not having an attack, because an attack will occur no matter how good you are with security. It's about going back to business, getting back to business, restoring the business, and also restoring the normal without, of course, impact, financial, but primarily reputation that cannot be mended, fixed in the near future. So recovery and response is definitely very, very important, and we should be focusing more on that.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the sentiments of the group. I countless times have I had discussions with my security peers and colleagues, and often the discussion is around preventative measures. We think that we can stop everything, and traditionally that's been okay. But when we look at wicked problems like ransomware, where we haven't been able to stop it. And you look at, for example, Colonial Pipeline and the ransomware attack that they faced. They restored their data from backups. How confident are we that we can do the same thing? Have we tested our ability to restore backups? Is our backup strategy in line with what the business objectives are meant to be? Or do we think we can stop everything? We know that we can't. So we have to start focusing more effort on recovery aspects. And just one point I wanted to make on sort of highlighting investment and making sure that your board and your senior executives are actually investing in the right measures for cybersecurity. I do believe it's a matter of probability and not possibility. When you think about the attacks that can happen, don't think about the things that are possible. Think about the things that are probable. And use as best as you can a quantitative approach rather than a qualitative approach. And with all the statistical data that we can see out there in the wild, I'm pretty sure we can even come up with a generalized statistical model to apply controls in a meaningful way, in a statistical way, so that we can invest a bit better.
Can I just add, Joe, it sounds like we're a bunch of cyber security specialists, because I think that they sit on the world view of it's those that have lost data and those that will lose their data is basically their binary view.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. And I like that notion about proactivity and reactivity, because the issue has always been, we have always tried to be proactive. I'm not sure that we've ever been particularly successful with the approach, but that's certainly what we've been trying for. So now that we have to actually be ready to react quickly, that's where I think some of this is beginning to come undone. Now, Siobhan, I'd like to ask you a question, because you're in that startup and upstart space in particular. I'm really interested in your thoughts on, when do tech startups actually should begin to address cybersecurity?
Thank you. Look, for evidence again, when you're starting a new venture, your current focus is ideally, around the finite resources. Most founders wear 10, 15 hats. They'll strap a broom to their back in parallel to make sure that they're doing the cleaning as well. So cybersecurity is definitely not a top priority, unless, of course, you're doing a reg tech, insure tech type venture. I think what tends to happen is that unless you're required to do it, a government contract, a customer acquisition that requires a certain cyber structures or setups or ISO qualifications, they don't tend to focus on it until maybe there's a breach. So most people are getting off the ground. They use or leverage enterprise cloud solutions, AWS, etc., assuming that is, providing some level of security protection. But as I said before, I think it's really around the email. Most businesses, when they're starting, a lot of their IP and a lot of their information is stored on email. Perhaps their only real measure of protection would be around their embryonic size. Most hackers put their effort towards bigger prizes rather than the smaller ones.
The interesting thing about that, though, is we know that startups and scale-ups are in that world of scale, protect, because all of a sudden something will come to light and they'll go, oh, better do something about that. So it's kind of that knee-jerky reaction. Do you think that we should really be encouraging founders to be thinking about this before they are attacked? And if so, how do we do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually have an entrepreneur that just graduated from the lab in Sydney, Fathom AI. So just quickly, they talk directly around which roles will be augmented and which ones will be automated in 5 years. And they have a lot of commentary around, rather than getting rid of talent, look at which ones have, 80% Pareto rule skill set, accounts payable clerks, which may be fully automated, move them across to cyber specialists. So that's one founder on the floor. Another founder on the floor, Tech Insight, do a lot of work with businesses. They're hugely advocates of getting the right cyber structures in the business set up. And I think, ACS, for instance, has a role to play. As I said, founders are focused on getting the outcome of scaling their business. If we give them the right, insights, approach, solutions to the market, that would be, really, really important.
So in fact, we could go as far as to say that professional bodies have a role to play in this because, ACS and ISACA are aligned in many respects. And so I'm sure there are pragmatic initiatives that we could be harnessing on both sides of that fence in particular.
Yeah, I would.
So, Philip, I'd just like to go back to you. If there was one thing that you would like to focus on to make a step change in security for an organisation in our region, what would it be?
Sure. No, look, I think it's almost getting the basics right. And I feel like a bit of a broken record. So we've had some great, best practice, whether I think of the Essential 8 coming out of Australia, CERT-NZ's critical controls, those would stop the large majority of the issues that we see, whether it be ransomware or something else. Yet I've yet to see an organisation across New Zealand or Australia, PNG as well, and I'm sure there are some that have all those implemented. And yes, it can be a bit difficult. And no, patching stuff's is not exciting. But certainly some of the technologies has caught up. Application whitelisting used to be painful, hard. Certainly now some of those best practice have changed that wording slightly to how we attack that. If we get the basics right, we'll go a long way there. Yet we're not. We're still focused trying to do other things and forgetting about those. So, we still fall for that phishing email. We still, get breached because we haven't applied a patch on a timely basis. It's a hygiene aspect. There's 8 things or 10 things, depending on whose list you pick. We get those in place. I think that would create a step change. It would go a long way. Certainly, smaller countries, New Zealand, PNG, we are very soft targets. That low maturity. Australia is better. Scale helps that, but not always.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add that the number one issue, I fully agree with what Philip said, and I would like to add that complexity reduction should be a priority for many organizations and especially governments, because that's the most important problem that needs to be solved first before even we discuss any security measures. Because as Philip said, we're trying to implement the basics. We fail in implementing the basics. We see hacks, very high-profile hacks that, at the end of the day, the root cause is an unattended router or a forgotten laptop of an executive. I think that the reducing complexity and appropriate governance of IT should be in place in order for security to be able to be successful, and of course risk management and focus on the right areas with the right budgets and according to what each enterprise, how much each enterprise can invest. And that's why it's so important in risk management to be able to link risks with the P&L of the company and calculate impact in a quantitative manner, as Raven said.
I think that's a really interesting point, that linking back to the P&L. I also think that it was touched on before, the discussion around how much does the board know and how much should the board know in the cyber space. I know in my own perspective, I report regularly to the Audit and Risk Committee, which is a standing committee of board. So it means that there are board members that sit on that and chair that group. So as a result of that, that's a direct conduit for me as the CISO to the board. So I can have those discussions and I can get their support and I can report to them. But, it's been an educative process, because boards and audit and risk committees, it's not necessarily core to their business understanding. So it's something they know they need to be aware of, but it's not necessarily core to their business understanding. So we have to, I believe, we have to be part of that education process to the board. Does anybody else feel like that, or does anybody have an opposing view to that?
I just wanted to echo that. Yeah, for me, in this space, I would say, it starts with people process. Forget about technology. Security is not a technology problem. That's the problematic thing. I think technology is so attractive, and when we see the way it's marketed, we often just claw to that and say, "Wow, I really want to get a hold of that stuff." But the true element of it is people process, and it's really in that order for a good reason. Start with your people, make sure they understand the value of cybersecurity, and then have a think about your processes and how you can actually integrate those practices in there. And then technology comes later. Technology is really not the important element of it all. And just to sort of backmark what you're saying, Joe, around making sure you have the right people at the board. I think a fundamental step change in the future will be we will actually have representatives coming from a strong cybersecurity background on your board of directors. It is then when we see a true change. We've seen the role of the CISO emerge as a C executive on the table. That's pretty fundamental. The next step of that is to have a cybersecurity role actually sitting on your board of directors. I think that will really kind of notch things up into place.
And we're certainly seeing that in other parts of the world. I think Oceania is a little bit slow in that regard. And I guess that's another thing that we're a little bit slow on in this part of the world. We're a little bit slow to give people the right title to do the job, right? Chief something is not something that we've done readily. You'll find all kinds of things like senior manager or executive manager and what they really are is a chief information security officer or chief security officer. So I think that's something that we need to lift the game on too. I'm going to stay with you, Raven, because I'd like to ask you because you've sort of touched on it, what does good leadership look like in respect to cyber? And are we advancing the protection and diversifying effectively along with that?
Yeah, this is a really, really passionate area of mine. I think one thing we really need to stop doing, and I might be pissing off a lot of people by saying this, but we need to stop putting things in our, in our PDs, in our position descriptions, like must have 10 years experience or must have, bless ISACA, but must have a CISA or a CIS or a CISM designation. We need to stop that because what that's doing is really setting this tone to say you're not allowed in if you haven't got that background, and that for me is shutting the door on true talent. When we look for these individuals, we should really be looking for attitude. When I've been doing quite a lot of interviews lately, and the number one thing that I look for is attitude. Now, granted, you need someone a lot of the times in certain roles with a degree of experience, and I think you can kind of glean that from your conversations within. So I would say diversification is really opening the door to people that might not necessarily have 20 or 30 years experience or every credential under the sun. It's more about where are they coming from? What's their passion towards the job? And you can skill them up. It's always something you can skill up. And I would always rather bring someone in that wants to skill up rather than someone that's already got the skill that's coming in, to be honest, because it's our role as leaders to actually advance the profession. And if we can't do that, then I don't think we're doing our job correctly.
I like that, advancing the profession. And in fact, it's about, I think that's fairly true in all the professions that ISACA serves. We have to be the leaders, right? That's why we're here, why we're having this discussion, is because we're clearly seen as having leadership roles. So thank you, Raven. I really like that. I'm going to go to Chris now. How should a professional body or enterprise, or indeed a professional individual, prepare for the increasing trust world?
It's a great question, Joe, and the response could be very lengthy, but I'll try and limit it to a few minutes or a few seconds. So the most important part to me is both for enterprises and individuals is to be able to follow a more holistic approach. And this is obvious, but the way in order to achieve this is it's much less obvious, according to my belief. So for individuals, for example, let's take the example of a cybersecurity professional. It's very, very important for that professional to start becoming more of a generalist on top of the expertise that she or he may possess in cybersecurity, respectively of the domain, whether in application, network, or whatever the cybersecurity expert is about. And by generalist, I mean the ability to gain knowledge from neighbor professions, like from the assurance profession, in order to understand the assurance requirements, how auditors operate, and how this security framework that will be built can be audited much more easily in order to be able to accommodate the assurance process and at the end of the day help it make it more successful. Risk, of course, the risk management profession and the knowledge in this profession is very, very important in cybersecurity. Knowledge around privacy is very important because so many times cybersecurity and privacy come in conflict. And the most important of all is for that cybersecurity professional to possess a business acumen, be able to understand the business targets and goals, and be able to speak the business language, and in order for the efforts that this person puts in cybersecurity to be successful. Otherwise, if we, as cybersecurity professionals, if we contain ourselves in the cybersecurity space, I believe that we can never be outliers and be those who can really bring a change in that aspect. And the same applies for organizations. They need to have departments working together very, very closely. Technology, audit, security, business, even marketing, HR. I mean, departments that sometimes look like that there should be, totally disconnected. I believe that if they are all related under a common framework, they can work towards realizing the goals of a business. And on top of that, of course, to be able to measure the maturity of the implementations, whether those are in technology, in trust, in cybersecurity, in order again to know and understand more, and then be able to improve.
I think that's a really good point. And I've had a similar discussion, interestingly, with our friend and fellow ISACA member and also Chris Moscovides about where cyber and privacy, that rubber hits the road. But for me, I actually see it as a converging space, because I see physical security, cyber security, privacy, risk and assurance, and indeed facilities management. If you look at that as a Venn diagram, there's a bit in the middle where we all meet that we should all be working collaboratively together across the landscape, right? So for me, I think that's a really interesting point. I'm just going to ask one very quick question of you all before I wrap up. I loved Chris's notion about generalists versus specialists. One of the things that I say to young people who come and ask me, or people who are actually wanting to make a change of career and come into cyber, they ask me what they should do. And I always suggest that they get a really good generalist technology understanding before determining what their specialism is going to be. Because, it's not as glamorous and groovy as people think. There's a lot of hard graft and hard work involved in cyber. So my question to each of you is, what advice would you give to someone who's wanting to come into cybersecurity? Raven, I'm going to start with you.
I would say the generalist notion is actually great. I would say pick something to start with, though. And although that I totally concur with the generalist notion, I think picking something and unpacking it so that you see the true inner workings and you discover your passion often works. I know, for example, myself, when I dived into this, I really took a passion for encryption, and I started breaking it down at a mathematical level, and then I really started enjoying it, and then I explored those other domains. So I think the generalization is brilliant, and as professionals, we definitely need to be generalists. But I think if you pick something like encryption, access control, physical security, whatever it might be, just unpack that a little bit, and then you might discover your passion and you'll be able to apply it.
Terrific, thank you. Infrastructure was my thing. Siobhan.
I concur with Raven. I think if you take a step back and think about traditional education, traditionally we do a core undergraduate, then you do a more generalist postgraduate. I think the same would apply in this space. So kind of getting into a focused area to start with, understanding the mechanics as Raven articulated, and then looking at becoming, your value will be more relevant when you have a more generalist view of the business and how it all interacts. But to be good at that, you need to have a single view of how things work, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Thanks, Siobhan. Philip.
I'm perhaps a little bit different. I think people should come in being generalists and be open to everything. If I look at, so I've spent last 2 weeks interviewing people for graduate positions for next year. 35 of the 40 people I talk to, they all want to be pen testers. That's great. That's where I started, was pen testing. I still do pen testing, but that's the whole world. And I think universities cause part of the problem. Universities typically in their cybersecurity papers or courses have a very narrow focus on what security is. They don't explore it. So I think people should be broad and then narrow down. Now that does depend on what sort of business you're in. If you're in a consulting business like us, it's easy to be broad. So doing everything and anything. If you're within a corporate or some other role, I will say that is difficult. But it depends what you want to do in your career in the future, and it's hard to know at the start. Whether you want to do something more technical, something more risk-oriented, compliance-oriented, there's a huge range. But we tend at the moment, universities pumping out one type of person with one type of thought process, and that's not helping to the extent it should around the shortages we all have around cybersecurity professionals.
Thank you. Chris, just a real quick tag.
So many great ideas. I guess I have to say something different now. I fully agree with everybody. My advice would be to focus on an unsaturated market in cybersecurity. I don't know, industrial systems, maritime industries that very, very soon will be in need of cybersecurity experts, and that person can have a competitive advantage there.
I love that. Find the niche, right? So I'm going to now just do a quick wrap up. I've been taking notes, as you've probably seen. Now, this is what I've heard. It's not necessarily what these guys said, but it's what I heard. Chris told us quite early on that 5G will play a huge role for all of us into the future, and I believe it has nothing whatever to do with COVID vaccination for the Australians in the room. Just saying out loud. Blockchain, is it the way to go? I think that was a question that we asked really early on, and it may not be all that it's cracked up to be. So something for us to think about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to blockchain. And sometimes in cyber, and I couldn't agree more with this, that we're too focused on the shiny toys for boys and girls, and that we really need to be considering whether we could get the best bang for our buck somewhere else, not on the shiny toys. So excellent. I loved Siobhan and Raven's idea about the arms race and the Cold War. It's something that I've certainly been ruminating on for a while now, and I believe that organisations are actually becoming collateral damage, and we've got to be aware that nation-state actors are a part of that landscape, and that's where some of these issues are. They don't actually want the information that we've got, even they want our route to government in many cases. And Chris told us that It's not if this stuff's going to fail, but it will fail eventually. And the other question coming on from that was we need to think about how resilient we are. And this was Raven telling us about, can we actually recover from an event? Because for so long we've been proactive, but now we also need to have our reactive hats on as well. And does the board have the necessary awareness of what you need in the cyberspace as a CISO? What have you got? What do you need? Do you have the right money? Do you have the right resources? Do you have the right human beings in place? Also, startups are not likely to do anything about cyber until they're compromised. So as professional bodies, perhaps that's part of our role is that education piece to make sure that they don't feel like that they are actually proactive, and that startups and scale-ups think about cyber protection and see it as a protection from ideation through. And complexity, we need to look at complexity. For too long, we've been creating such complex environments. It actually is bound to leave holes and easy for the bad guys to get into. We should be thinking about linking risks to P&L. Tech professionals are really good about thinking about risk, but we don't necessarily formally do something about it. So it has to be quantitative versus qualitative. And we need to educate the board and the audit and risk committee. It's about people and process. It's about educate. I actually think they're the three most, I have to check, I've got three fingers up there. The three most important things that a CISO does. We need generalists as well as specialists. There's a convergence in roles in security with other roles in the business. And anybody going into security who wants to climb to the dizzy heights needs to make sure that they have business acumen and that they speak the language of business. We also need to be in the position of making a change. I love that notion that we do need to be ready to make a change and to discover your passion. What is your passion? What do you really want to do? The thing that scared me was Raven's passion for maths. Just saying. And I love Philip's advice, be open to everything. You never know when the best opportunity might come along as long as you're open. Also find the niche. I love that idea of Chris's. Find where there's a new emerging market and run with it. Thank you so much, panel. It's been sensational having you to have this discussion today, and I've just loved the interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you for moderating, Joe. Great job.
Great job.